Hi there and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Capellos in Ottawa on this Thursday. Tonight, crime legislation coming.
It will no longer be up to the Crown to prove why someone should stay behind bars. It will be up to the accused.
He is personally responsible for the growing crime problem that he helped create.
The Prime Minister details long-promised bail reform legislation he says will be introduced next week. In moments, we'll talk to his parliamentary secretary, Rachel Bendayan, then get opposition reaction from Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer. Then politics and policing.
Don't take any orders from any political individual.
RCMP Commissioner Mike Duhem hits back at a Conservative accusation that he covered up the SNC-Lavalin scandal for Justin Trudeau. Our front bench with Brian Gallant, James Moore and Nathan Cullen is set to dig into that and the politics of new crime legislation coming up. Plus, the Prime Minister's not hitting back.
I am sick and tired of sitting and rolling over. We need to fight back.
There's times to hit back and there's times to talk, and right now is the time to talk.
Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ontario's Doug Ford meeting at the Premier's home this hour as the two leaders clash over whether or not to retaliate against Donald Trump. The latest from that meeting a little bit later on in the show with our front bench. First, though.
Right now, in most bail hearings, the starting point is to release. And the Crown must prove why someone should not be released on bail, making it too easy for repeated violent offenders to quickly get back on the street. Our new law will flip that script.
He is personally responsible for the growing crime problem that he helped create. We are going to scrap Liberal bail, scrap Liberal parole, and scrap Liberal laws. Instead, we're going to bring in 3 strikes, you're out. 3 serious offenses, an offender will go to jail for 10 years with no chance of parole, probation, house arrest, or bail.
Prime Minister Mark Carney initially they're making a long-awaited bail reform announcement after months of pressure to crack down on crime, promising legislation within a week that will introduce reverse onus bail for major crimes. That means an accused would have to prove why they should get bail instead of the Crown proving why they should not. The legislation, according to the Prime Minister, will allow consecutive sentencing, so multiple crimes means longer time behind bars, and impose harsher penalties for organized retail theft, plus restrict conditional sentences for a number of sexual offenses. The Prime Minister also previewed money in the upcoming November budget to hire 1,000 more RCMP personnel. That last one was a campaign promise that the Prime Minister included in his first throne speech. Rachel Bendayan is Parliamentary Secretary to Prime Minister Mark Carney. Hi, Ms. Bendayan. Welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for making the time.
Thank you, Vashi. Good to be here.
I listened very closely to the Prime Minister's justification, in particular for moving forward in a more broad-based way on reverse onus, where repeat offenders, for example, are concerned, and now expanding to major crimes. And I wanted to ask you point blank, why not go a step further and repeal the codification of the principle of restraint?
Well, I think we're going to see how this works. Frankly, it was a suggestion made by provinces and territories as well as law enforcement. I think what we have done is proportionate in the sense that what we're doing is really looking at repeat offenders as well as violent crime in particular. And what we are also seeing is that boots on the ground matters. And so in conjunction with strengthening the criminal code and making some of the changes that you mentioned, we're also hiring 1,000 new RCMP officers, which I think will also make a huge difference. So it's really a two-pronged approach, strengthening our criminal code and our legislation and hopefully making our court system more efficient, but also adding to our frontline officers.
And I have a number of questions about the RCMP in a second, but on the first part of what you're explaining, I guess I still am not sure when you talk about it being in a proportionate manner of how you're able to assess that. Like basically what happened is the Liberals a number of years ago introduced legislation that codified that principle of restraint. The impact was tremendous. We heard that from multiple law enforcement agencies and multiple politicians at both the municipal and the provincial level. You introduced legislation to then, expand again reverse onus, or to introduce reverse onus on certain crimes in 2023. Obviously, it didn't go far enough, or we wouldn't be here today. So why not go as far as you possibly can and repeal the problem as it existed in the first place?
Well, I think we're going to see what the impact is of making the reverse onus, expanded, as you had said, to these additional crimes and to repeat offenders. I think the fact of the matter is, and reverse onus sounds like a complicated term, but it essentially means that the accused would have to be the one to prove to a judge that they don't pose a significant threat to the community if they were granted bail. And it allows judges to do their jobs, frankly, which is to assess the situation, look at all of the facts, look at the accused in the eye, and make a determination. And I think it maintains the respect of the judiciary while getting serious on serious crimes.
Can society, though, Ms. Bendayan, afford to just wait and see how this works? I'm going to use the words of a former Justice Minister, David Lametti, in 2023, who said the exact same thing you just did. The laws on bail that we currently have are clear. If one poses a threat to society, he or she should not be out on bail. And yet here we are 2 years later with your government introducing legislation to rectify a problem that has emerged in the interim. Can we afford, as a society, to just wait and see how this one works before you go another level?
Well, I think before going to another level, we do need to assess the entire situation. And what we have heard from law enforcement and what we've heard from provinces and territories is that this is something that we should try. I think we need to work in partnership with law enforcement. I think we also need provinces and territories to do their part. Because if we were to make the change that you suggest, Vashi, I think we would also have an issue of capacity in our prisons, which are already at over capacity as it is, as well as issues around a lack of prosecutors and lawyers needed at the provincial level. So I do think we need to be smart about the approach that we're taking. And today's announcement is not only proportionate, but is also about getting serious on serious offenders. And again, I come back to the need as well for boots on the ground, which I think we'll come to now, but the importance of getting more officers on the front lines is critical.
Do you have any evidence, though, Ms. Bendayan, to support the claim that the codification of the principle of restraint has actually addressed issues of overcapacity or overrepresentation? Because I can't find it.
I think you would probably want to talk to law enforcement about some of that, but the important...
I mean, just to be clear, so they were vehemently against. I cannot find a law enforcement organization that was not against the impacts of C-75. That is what brought about the initial changes in 2023.
And today, a new Liberal government is proposing new legislation, which will be tabled next week in the House of Commons. I think this is a government that has shown itself to be providing a new approach. And, we're putting a new idea into action today by announcing changes to the criminal code that'll make it stronger.
But what I'm trying to do is not sort of find holes in all this. I'm genuinely trying to figure out, on behalf of Canadians who are witnessing a lot of this crime and violent crime take place, if it's going to work. And, the thing I come back to is the codification of the principle of restraint. I understood the impetus for it at the beginning. The impact of it, however, was very different from the intention behind it. Part of what the Liberals, yes, a different government, but one that you were a part of, used to justify C-75 in the first place was that it would address the issues of overrepresentation of minorities in the justice system, and it would address issues of capacity. I see no evidence at this point that either of those issues have been addressed. So why is your government so married to it?
Well, Vashi, I think that this is a step forward in that what we're looking at is repeat offenders. What we're looking at is a particularly violent crime, auto theft, home invasion, assault, sexual assault. These are things that we have identified as being extraordinarily serious and requiring more serious consequences. And so that is the purpose of the changes that we are making today.
When are the 1,000 additional RCMP personnel going to be hired by?
We are looking to invest nearly $2 billion, $1.8 billion over 4 years. And so I believe that that will be over the course of 2026 to 2030. And those officers will come online quite quickly in that 4-year period. We also have specific 150 RCMP officers that are going to be focused on financial crime in particular, because what we've seen is an increase in organized crime and fraud, money laundering, and we are trying to identify officers that have an expertise in order to focus on financial crimes in particular.
So just to be specific, sorry, I got some of that, but so I understand the funding is over 4 years. Does that mean you'll have 1,000 RCMP officers at the end of those 4 years? Like, how soon are you going to hire? And I ask against the backdrop of another election promise that your party made, which was to increase resources at the border, the CBSA. I had the public safety minister on a few weeks ago who conceded that nobody had been hired in the last 6 months.
Well, hiring will be done by the RCMP itself. It's not politicians that are going to go out and hire the RCMP officers. So we will be providing the funding. And I would invite you to maybe ask the RCMP how quickly they feel that they will be able to onboard folks. But certainly from our government's perspective, this is something that should be done post-haste.
I understand that you're not able to direct the RCMP, but when the government gives a body money, isn't there an expectation associated with that, particularly when you're claiming, as you are tonight, that that is going to support the criminal code reforms that you're bringing into place, that is what will ensure their effectiveness? Don't Canadians deserve to know at what point there will be more RCMP officers or personnel?
Well, I think we also have to deal with the fact that, you want to find the right people to hire. And so I believe that this money will be made available in 2026 in a few months' time. And so with that money, as it starts to come in, the RCMP will begin to hire. At what point they'll be able to finish finding 1,000 new officers, I think that would be a question for the RCMP. But certainly this is something that we would like to get done in the next year to 2 years as the money continues to roll in, beginning, as I said, in the next fiscal.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. I appreciate your time as always, Ms. Bendayan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vashti.
Rachel Bendayan is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. On that screen ahead of you, that's the front bench. Brian Gallant, James Moore, and Nathan Cullen will be here a little bit later on in the show to talk about the politics around this crime-related announcement. First, though, we're going to get some more reaction to the substance of the announcement. Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer is with me on the other end of a short commercial break. Back in a moment here on Power Play. Welcome back to Power Play. Just before the break, you heard from the Prime Minister's Parliamentary Secretary, Rachel Bendayan, on her government's upcoming bail reform legislation, a suite of measures the government says is intended to crack down on repeat offenders, including introducing reverse onus bail specifically for major crimes, which means an accused would have to prove why they should get bail instead of the Crown proving why they should not. The Conservatives have long called for bail reform. Will they support this legislation? Joining us now is Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer. Hi, Mr. Scheer. Good to have you back on the program. Thanks for making the time.
Good afternoon. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. I hope you're doing well as well. I wanted to start off on the question of not necessarily if you're going to support it because you haven't seen it, but just based, I read the statement that your party put out, which was immediately criticizing the legislation. And I'm wondering why, if you haven't read the details, you aren't waiting until you do before you say this is bad.
Well, based on what the government has announced, what they've basically acknowledged is that they are not going to tackle bail reform. This is not bail reform. First of all, what I would have loved to have seen from a Liberal Prime Minister making an announcement claiming to undo previous Liberal laws that caused the crime wave is an apology. Mark Carney stood up there and he's trying to act like he's responding to some new thing that came out of left field. Liberal changes to our bail regime caused the crime wave that is plaguing so many Canadian communities. And I would have liked to have seen a Liberal Prime Minister make a direct apology to all the victims of crime that have had their lives shattered because of criminals that this government set free. They didn't do that. In typical arrogant Liberal fashion, they just tried to act like they should get a hero cookie for trying to clean up their own mess. Nothing in this announcement today changes the principle of least restraint that the Liberal government brought in that forces judges to grant bail as an almost automatic option.
So I spent about, more than half of the last interview asking the government representative why they aren't repealing that. And I do take your point on the initial legislation in C-75. My understanding, though, is, by focusing on major crimes, for example, and what the previous bill in 2023 did, it allows for that principle to remain part of the guidance for nonviolent crimes, for non-repeat offenders, which might actually go toward helping reduce some of the backlogs in the courts. Why not remain open to that possibility?
Well, I think you've asked a great question. It gives me an opportunity to contrast the liberal approach and the conservative approach as it relates to this key point. Reverse onus does not make bail harder to get. If you think of bail, an accused getting bail as a hurdle that has to be jumped over, reverse onus just changes the direction in which the accused has to run to jump over it. The Liberals have set that so incredibly low that it kind of doesn't matter which direction the criminal is trying to jump over it from. This reverse onus list does not take away that principle of least restraint. It just shifts who has to make the arguments about whether or not bail should be granted. And judges will still have to look at the changes Liberals brought in and say, I am bound by this legislation to follow the principle of least restraint. And it won't really matter if it's the Crown arguing or if it's the accused arguing. They're still going to have that very low barrier to bail. And what we've seen since the Liberals changed these laws, there has been an explosion. We're not talking about a slight tick up, or we're not talking about, in specific areas. Violent crime is up across the board, across the country. It's up over 60%. Crimes with firearms is up, almost doubled. So we're talking about places that used to be safe, people that used to be able to park their car at night and go to evening events, go to restaurants, don't feel safe anymore. And so many lives have been shattered by criminals that this government has let out. So that's the key difference between the Liberal approach and the Conservative approach. We want to take away that principle of least restraint so that dangerous or repeat offenders actually go to jail.
I do understand that, but I'm looking at, for example, all the submissions put forward by the various police associations, which ask for exactly what the government says it's going to do, which is apply that principle of reverse onus. I look at the reaction today from the Toronto Police Association, which represents police officers in that city. They say this is a step in the right direction. The Canadian Police Association, this should be a moment for collaboration, not division. We urge all parties to engage constructively and pass this legislation as quickly as possible to enhance public safety and restore Canadians' diminished confidence in the justice system. What do you know that police don't?
Well, I know that police have been calling for the elimination of that principle of least restraint. And while they may have been calling for other things, we continue to point out the fact that basically what the Liberals' approach is this. Liberals look at dangerous and repeat offenders, and they have compassion for that accused person. They have compassion for that criminal, and they say, "Oh, these poor people that fall into a life of crime, and it's not really their fault, and let's not make them go to jail." Conservatives, our compassion are for victims of crime. Our compassion is for the moms and dads that no longer let their kids go to the park, business owners who are getting extorted. I mean, actually, when you were growing up, did you ever hear about Canadian business owners getting extorted? That's something you saw in movies and mobster films. This is now happening in many communities across the country. You can draw a direct line to Liberal legislation that both lowered penalties for dangerous and repeat offenders, but also forced judges to grant bail. And what we're saying is, let's adopt, if you want to have collaboration, if Liberals are willing to admit that they've made mistakes, great. Go the whole way. Work with us to pass Conservative bill, jail, not bail, that will take away that principle of least restraint and keep those dangerous and repeat offenders behind bars so that they can't terrorize Canadians.
But again, today, Mr. Scheer, I don't hear police associations saying what you are, which is this doesn't go nearly far enough. We need to repeal that principle. And even if they were to repeal that principle, there are still 3 pieces of case law, including in 2019, the Supreme Court case R versus Antic, that was kind of the impetus for the legislation in the first part that guides judges' decisions anyway. So even if you repealed what you say the government should, you would still have a judiciary that is guided by that principle to some effect. Applying reverse onus to major crimes will impact the way in which they're able to apply the principle and keep it to nonviolent crimes, will it not?
No, really, all reverse onus means is which party in the court case has to make the arguments. That barrier to getting bail is still incredibly low with that principle of least restraint. And as to the court decisions that the Liberals used as an excuse, I know that's what the Liberals want people to believe, was that there was some court ruling that forced them to write this law. It's just not the case. Those court rulings were kind of speaking to financial surety around bail. Once bail was granted, what conditions were attached to that. The Liberals chose to take those court rulings and build a hole that you could drive a Mack truck through for forcing judges to grant bail. So they nowhere in that court decision did it force the government to bring in Bill C-5 and Bill C-75. They codified the principle of least restraint. That is what led to the explosion in crime across the country. And we believe Canadians support us in this, that bringing in our jail not bail law meets the charter test of a reasonable response to a pressing and substantial issue facing Canadians. And I don't believe there's a Canadian out there who has had their car stolen or had their business broken into or seen someone, yelling threats on a bus or a subway that doesn't believe that crime right now, after 10 years of Liberal policies, is not a pressing and substantial issue.
Yeah, I don't mean to say that they were forced to codify it. It was their decision to codify it, but the cases do exist in case law. I just have to, before I let you go, Mr. Scheer,
but they do not relate to the principle of least restraint.
It's about the latter principle. The judgment in R versus Antic did criticize lower courts for routinely overusing bail conditions. But I have to move on to just one thing, if you don't mind, before I let you go, because the leader of your party made some comments in a podcast that I want to get your take on, because it's actually about policing. The podcast, I believe, was taped October 3rd, posted yesterday. He was referencing the RCMP's decision not to pursue criminal charges against Justin Trudeau or other people in the government over their involvement in the SNC scandal. Mr. Poilievre characterized the leadership of the RCMP as, quote, despicable when it comes to enforcing laws against the Liberal government, and accused them of covering up for Trudeau. Do you have proof of that?
Did you hear the taped audio between the Liberal Prime Minister's clerk of the Privy Council and former Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould? Because I heard that audio recording, and I heard explicit and implicit threats to a justice minister to grant, if she did not grant, a special deal to SNC-Lavalin. I believe that's a matter of public record, and so I certainly I don't agree with the idea that there was not an attempt to interfere in the justice minister's role as an independent officer of the court.
But that's not what I asked, Mr. Scheer. You have a view that a crime was committed. The accusation from Mr. Poilievre, who in a matter of weeks or months could run an election and be prime minister, is that the RCMP leadership covered up for the prime minister. That's a very direct accusation about the leadership of our national police force. Do you have evidence of it?
Well, as I just pointed out, there's direct evidence of an attempt by the prime minister, a sitting Liberal prime minister, to interfere with the attorney general's carrying out of her duties. That audio was released. I listened to it on I believe you probably have too. And that is what I would point to. That when the RCMP says, oh, there's no evidence of interference, it's like, well, sorry, what more do you need? There's other cases where, the Justin Trudeau's illegal acceptance of a private holiday that the RCMP chose not to investigate. So, there's a lot of examples where senior Liberals have been caught breaking the law or attempting, or at least what a reasonable person would say there's evidence that should be explored, and the RCMP chose not to.
No, but the RCMP did choose to explore that evidence, and they have testified to the fact
they chose not to proceed to the point where
public statements. Wait a second, public statements on record saying that they were not able to obtain certain cabinet confidences. So why is that a cover-up? Isn't that the fault of cabinet at the time or the government at the time? Shouldn't your ire be directed at the political level and not at calling the leadership of the RCMP despicable and covering up for a prime minister?
Well, I absolutely believe that the Liberals acted despicably in this.
No,
I would just
the RCMP commissioners who Mr. Poilievre accused.
I don't think you can make the accusation that I or my leader, Pierre Poilievre, we're not holding the Liberals accountable for their role in this as well. I mean, we absolutely attempted to prosecute both the SNC-Lavalin scandal, the Green Slush Fund scandal. We tried to get those documents to the RCMP. We tried to get the RCMP to take action and elevate this to a level where these crimes would actually be prosecuted. That's not what happened. So I think my leader has a strong case to make when he calls this out, and we certainly believe that the leadership of the RCMP should act independently and should not be afraid to hold politicians accountable.
He said today, the commissioner of the RCMP, that he doesn't answer to any politician, that he isn't beholden to anyone. Do you not believe him?
Well, yeah, I just continue to point out that when you have Liberal politicians attempting to interfere in an independent court case, accepting illegal gifts, funneling money through Liberal board members in the Green Slush Fund, where the Liberals split their friends and political donors onto a board to allocate taxpayers' money, and they allocated that taxpayers' money. They gave it to themselves. They gave it to their own companies, and still. We haven't seen criminal prosecutions on that. We saw the RCMP completely abandon the SNC-Lavalin affair when there was an audio of the Prime Minister's right-hand man, Michael Wernick, trying to pressure Jody Wilson-Raybould into making a decision she did not believe was just. And so I think I've laid out a very compelling case that would certainly run counter to the quote you might have from the RCMP.
Okay, I got to leave it on that note. I'm out of time. I appreciate your time as always, Mr. Scheer. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Andrew Scheer is the Conservative House Leader. In the face of Donald Trump's never-ending and ever-evolving economic threats, should Canada fight back or talk it out? Our front bench will join me next on the other end of a short break. There they are to talk about that. Brian Gallant, James Moore, and Nathan Cullen. Back in a moment with them.
What my message to the Prime Minister when I meet him on Thursday is, if you can't get a deal, let's start hitting him back. I am sick and tired of sitting and rolling over. We need to fight back.
We start from a position where we have a better deal than any other country in the world with the United States. So we're starting from this stronger position. But we're also very acutely aware and very focused on the fact that we can make it better. And so we will do everything we can to make it better. There's times to hit back and there's times to talk, and right now is the time to talk.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford and Prime Minister Mark Carney are meeting this hour at Premier Ford's home, with U.S. President Donald Trump and the ongoing trade war expected to be a focal point. As you just heard there, they have opposing views on how to respond in this moment to Donald Trump's tariffs, with Ford saying it's time to retaliate, while Carney says it's time to talk. What are the politics of each? Let's bring in our front bench. This evening, former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant is here. He's the CEO of Space Canada now. CTV political analyst and former Conservative Industry Minister James Moore is with us. He's a policy advisor at Edelman now. And former NDP MP and BC Minister Nathan Cullen is here. He's a senior advisor with Strategy Corp at the moment. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you tonight. I appreciate you making the time. Brian, I'll start with you. What the Prime Minister just laid out, that essentially the argument is that there are times to hit back and there are times to keep talking. How long do you think that argument holds water with Canadians? Like the position he has now, that now is the time to talk and not fire back. How long does he have that resonates with Canadians, do you think?
So look, the way that you frame that question, there's no question that people are getting nervous. People are worried. We have seen a bunch of deadlines come and go over the summer. And I think Ford is probably one of the better politicians in Canada at sort of getting a sense of the pulse out there. And if he is saying that he's getting to the point that maybe he thinks we should hit back, or that he thinks we should hit back, that's probably because there's a lot of Canadians feeling that way. He's quite good at that. Now, you framed the question on how long maybe Canadians will have patience. I think in this sort of discussion, though, the other way to look at it is the idea that there's only a handful of individuals that are actually in these meetings, that are hearing from Trump directly, that are hearing from his officials. And look, it's one of those things that you have to kind of say, we're going to have to trust them for now. The outcome ultimately in the next few months and maybe over the next year will ultimately judge if they took the right approach. But they're the ones that can see at the table what the tone is, how things are progressing, what are the issues that are still on the table, what is left to be discussed. And based on that, Carney and his team think it's still time to talk. So I'm going to take them at the word for now. I would certainly think it would be prudent for us to do that, given that they have been for the last few months, I think, getting some positive sort of reactions outwardly from the Trump administration in terms of where this is going, but time will tell.
Yeah, the only caveat maybe that I would add to that is that they have set some other deadlines, right? We'd have a deal by August the 1st. That came and that went. We might have something by the end of the summer. Then that came and that went. And then we arrive at now. And while they are keeping their cards, James, close to their chest, the administration in the White House is not. You know, 1 day or 2 days after that meeting in the Oval Office, where we got a hint that maybe steel and aluminum and energy could be on the table, Howard Lutnick makes a speech to a crowd that a number, maybe all of you were there, a number of people were at, where he basically says, no auto deal, never, see you later. Which then, you know, leaves people like Premier Ford or Unifor or all these other kind of representatives of that sector or the forestry sector, which weren't mentioned, like antsy about what we're going to do in response, which is sort of informing my line of questioning around how much patience do you think Canadians have? And I'm wondering what you think.
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, whether the president and Secretary Lutnick have a good cop, worse cop, or bad cop, worse cop combo going on, I don't know. But look, I think Canadians are right to be optimistic that the Prime Minister has sort of breached into the sort of good psyche of President Trump in the short term. That's fine. But on the other hand, there's not been a lot of sort of dividends that have been yielded to Canadians as a consequence of that. In fact, for a lot of sectors, of course, things have slid in the opposite direction. To your first question, though, you know, is it time to, befriend and talk or to push back? I think the reality is you do both. But perhaps I disagree with Doug Ford that pushing back and fighting back doesn't mean, pouring out a bottle of Crown Royal and sort of yelling at the president and calling him names. That's not the move. The way you fight back is to make Canada a more attractive place to do business. The way you fight back is you actually do exploit those global markets with whom we do have binding global free trade access agreements. The way you fight back is you play the long game and support Canadian businesses and industry such that they can compete on the international stage by making doing business in Canada more constructive. And hey, look, we've got a budget on the horizon, so you can actually put some measures in place. That means that if you hire in Canada and you build in Canada, you're not going to be taxed into the ground. So there are tools at the Prime Minister's disposal. And I don't know that just sort of fighting and being belligerent against Donald Trump, because I think he's going to be president for another 3 years, 3 months, and about 3 days. So he's going to be president for a while longer. So, it's going to be a long, long fight if the posture is to just fight. And this is a president who is easily flattered and he's very easily offended. And so we need to focus on the Canadian game.
There are other sort of regional or sectoral differences that are playing into pressure on the Prime Minister to do one thing or another. In both you and James Nathan are in BC, where that came to light this week, where there's a lot of impetus from the forestry sector, but also the Premier of the province, who was, kind of criticizing the federal government for being focused too much on central Canada and ignoring what is not just a problem in BC with the forestry sector, but where Brian is in New Brunswick, too, sort of a similar but less, let's say, punctuated message from Susan Holt. How do you think that ends up unfolding for the Prime Minister?
Well, a few things. The lumber sector is very much feeling somewhat ignored. They were promised support back in the summer. It hasn't rolled out yet. It's supposedly coming in a few weeks. To your central question, though, Vashi, about do you fight or do you talk? Well, obviously, both is possible, because that's what the president does all the time while he's talking. And I think it's necessary but not sufficient to be on his good side, as James talked about. It's nice that they're getting along. The president doesn't call our prime minister names, although he still talks about taking over a country, which is perplexing and annoying and angering to a lot of people. But he is constantly putting more tariffs on. So Brian's point about the results, that's what's going to matter. But it's real hard to turn to auto workers, steel workers, aluminum, forestry, fish. Like, the list is getting long, and say, we're getting along better, but the tariffs keep getting higher and higher, and you're losing your job. So I think it's nothing wrong with flattery and all those things if it gets you results. But the coalition the Prime Minister needs of the premiers and industry supporting his approach, I think, is starting to fracture a little bit. I think it's starting to show weakness. It was very unified 5-6 months ago, but it was all on this bet that we could pacify this president, mollify him, and actually get to a trade deal. But then we hear his trade representative saying, forget it on auto, and then more and more tariffs hitting Canadians and Canadian workers.
And how much of that do you think is sort of, I guess, exacerbated or influenced or impacted, Brian, by the fact that we have kind of adopted the framing that the U.S. wanted heading into these kinds of negotiations, which is sector by sector, right? Like, there's not going to be anything overarching. We've decided we can arrive at a deal on steel, aluminum, and energy, which are the only three things that came out of the Prime Minister's mouth last week when he was talking about the prospect of an agreement. But then clearly Lutnick's talking about autos. This week there's additional tariffs on not just the lumber product, but also, like, you know, manufactured products like cabinets and furniture. Like, that's the strategy that they employed going in, right? We want to do it on a sector by sector basis. How do you avoid, at the end of the day, there not being divisions based on those sectors?
Look, I don't think that's ideal. I believe that the Trump administration knows that. And what ends up happening, or could end up happening, I should say, is the idea that where they see in a sector, oh, you know what, these tariffs that we've put on Canada are really hurting us. We probably do have to mitigate that, maybe get rid of them significantly or altogether. Well, let's make a deal on that one, and then they'll be a little happier, and then we're just going to be pretty aggressive on this other one, right? Where if you took all of the sectorial sort of discussions at the same time, then you're able to say, well, look, we know you need this. You need our energy. You need our aluminum and steel. You need our wood. If you can sort of go to the things that you know that they're going to need and try to have a stronger hand, that's probably better for Canada. So that does worry me. The other part I would add in terms of the framing, I also worry, and look, I get it. I think the Prime Minister is trying to set expectations where basically you saw him, he's taking a bit of the framing of, we do have the best deal relative to all the other countries when it comes to tariffs, which is true because of the large percentage that will fall under CUSMA, and he keeps repeating that. So that certainly is worrisome because it does give me the impression that he's trying to set the stage that, look, if we can get with CUSMA, if we can get out of this with CUSMA being relatively untouched, and then try to get a few of these sectorial deals to be a little bit better, that's probably what they're sensing will be the best that they can get. So I can see them preparing the terrain for that, and obviously that's not great for a lot of sectors.
Okay, I got to take a very quick commercial break, but the front bench is sticking around. We're going to turn our attention to that crime legislation coming next week that the Prime Minister talked about today. Back in a moment with that discussion.
This is how the federal government can help municipalities and provinces get criminals off the streets, disrupt and dismantle criminal networks, reinforce the justice system with tough and comprehensive bail reform, and build a stronger, safer, more secure Canada.
Liberal bail has caused a massive crime wave. It allows repeat offenders to be released within hours of their latest arrests. It has led to murders, robberies. Liberal bail is the problem, and what Mr. Carney needs to do is scrap liberal bail. Today, all he promised was to reintroduce something the Liberals already announced 2 years ago, a reverse onus proposal that does not scrap liberal bail.
Welcome back to Power Play, and our top story, the Prime Minister's announcement of long-promised bail reform aimed at cracking down on repeat offenders. He says it'll be introduced within a week, but the Conservatives say, as you heard there, it won't go far enough toward addressing crime rates in this country. Our front bench is back to talk about that. Brian Gallant, James Moore, and Nathan Cullen. James, I'll start with you. I think besides the substance of what was announced today, the visual, the fact that this announcement was made in the Greater Toronto area, area that was, basically, I know people who ran the Liberal campaign thought cost them their majority, and the issue of crime was central to that. Surrounded by RCMP officers, like that backdrop was left quite an impression. What does that tell you about the inherent politics of this announcement and this intended legislation?
Yeah, I got to say, I'm not a big fan of the visual of, people who are currently in office in uniform serving and sort of being used as a political. But I've never been comfortable with that. By the way, that's a criticism of red team, blue team, orange team, don't care. But obviously, it's a political thing that the Prime Minister can do, that he can put in place there. He wants to be seen on the tough end of the stick when it comes to our justice system. And it's what it is. On the things that he announced, though, Ending conditional sentences for sexual assault, fine. 1,000 new RCMP officers, fine, probably good, probably proportionate to the growth of our population. The other two matters are the reverse onus of bail. Pierre Poilievre is right. That's been proposed in the past. In fact, it's in place now for people who have been deemed not criminally responsible, and it has a pretty shaky track record of actually being an effective tool. So maybe some lessons can be learned and something meaningful can happen there. And the fourth piece that the Prime Minister talked about, though, is allowing judges to put in place consecutive, not concurrent sentencing. Now, when Conservatives were in office, we put in place mandatory consecutive sentencing, and the courts had something to say about that, and it didn't survive that scrutiny. So maybe having a provision there that allows a judge to put it in place might have a better yield in terms of having that happen to violent offenders. But I don't know that it's a great deal of comfort. I was looking for one big sort of wow announcement that would be sort of really sort of shake the headlines, and that wasn't quite there. But overall, it's a decent package. What I'm hopeful for is that this Parliament, that this will be a subject matter that this Parliament can actually sink its teeth into, because I actually think there's goodwill on the Liberal side, Conservative side, amongst a lot of people who've been there for a while to do something meaningful. And I hope that they can actually cooperate, because Canadians are fed up and they're frustrated. They don't think the system works. And there's some reasonable starting points for proposals here. And I hope that this minority Parliament can get into the details and be rational about it.
What do you think the chances, Nathan, of that are? And I would say, like, I agree with James, like, there's tons of overlap here. Another area where we see much more overlap between the Conservatives and the Liberals than we did when it was the Conservatives and the Liberals under Justin Trudeau.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, added to the list of things that they somewhat violently agree on. I hope for James's resolution of a rational debate on crime. It was one of those issues that I was constantly frustrated in, and it so often felt like the public and victims were somehow afterthoughts to the politics, where we would see sometimes legislation come through that we knew wouldn't survive or was very unlikely to survive a court challenge, but it sounded good. And it was brought in, and victims' families were excited. And I remember thinking, man, the betrayal of those families is that they're not being told the truth. That's something that on the surface sounds great, is unconstitutional, goes against the charter, some aspect of it is just not going to ever be. And that's more frustrating than anything, because a lot of time is wasted and more victims are created. I think James is right. I think it probably hits the tone right, certainly amongst the advocates from the policing side of things. Where this started was over-incarceration, particularly of Indigenous Canadians. This was an attempt to change that, but didn't get at the root of the issue. And there's many more things that can be done, not simply lowering the conditions of bail and seeing the repeat offenders. And it really did start out here in BC with the NDP government getting so frustrated at seeing people arrested and then returned quickly for repeat violent offenses. Let's be clear about what kind of cases we're talking about.
Yeah, Brian, it's sort of an interesting, like in the initial bill that was introduced, like the intent was to do one thing. The impact of it was very different. And to Nathan's point, like there were municipal politicians in British Columbia who came forward very quickly, police, various enforcement, law enforcement groups, and then that spread around the rest of the country. Is it your view that they got the balance right in this, or will they face more pressure to do more of what the Conservatives are saying?
Yeah, well, look, I think the point that you just raised lends itself to James's point that it would be wonderful to see this sort of really debated, discussed, sent to committee, worked on in a collaborative tone, and obviously try to put politics aside, as Nathan put out there as well. I'm pessimistic though, because I do, although I generally agree with both James and Nathan, I do think the politics of this are a bit fraught for collaboration to be. To sort of win the day. Reason for that, you actually, in your preamble, Vashi, to this segment, I think you pinpointed it. I think the Liberals believe that the seats that they lost, that they thought they could have won, I should put it as that way. The ones in the GTA in Ontario, at the heart of it was the crime and the crime rates that were happening in those communities, and that the Liberals were seen to not have done enough. That also means that the Tories most likely see that they won on that issue, and in fact it didn't deliver a majority for the Liberals, and maybe it's something that they can kind of grow on moving forward. So I think that the politics of it means that it's going to be an issue that we're going to see still debated with a partisan lens. And look, I think we saw that in the reaction, of course, on Poilievre's part, and I think you're going to see the idea that the Liberals are going to try to say, look, we're doing something, try to mitigate it. But on the politics, I'm not sure that even if this stuff is the right policy, if it will work, that it's actually going to be able to reduce crime quickly enough over the next few months, years before whenever the next election is, that it really had the intended impact, other than that they can say when there is an issue, people bring it up, we did the following things to try to address this.
Well, they also have to contend with their record over the last number of years, James, which was to sort of counter or fight back against the characterization that this was something Canadians were really worried about. They came to the point where they did eventually, but they had to be brought there.
Yeah, and and there's plenty of politics to be played with this, and sometimes politics is appropriate, right? Pierre can say the Liberals have been in power for 10 years. It took them 10 years and a shift in a prime minister to put something on the table. It's a bit like what was there before, and all that's fine. That's good for politics. But at the end of the day, I mean, I can tell my former colleagues, as a former member of Parliament, that the sense of satisfaction that you get after you leave office about actually having been earnest and not just trying to win some political points, but actually do some public good, where you can point back to years after the fact and say, you know what, they proposed a bill and we came to committee and we worked together and we had this amendment and they were reciprocal in their offering and we kind of balanced things out and we moved. It wasn't we didn't win the Super Bowl, maybe didn't win the game, maybe it was a field goal or a touchdown, but we got the ball down the field. Country's a little safer, we're a little better off, and Canadians can know that progress was made. The absolutism kind of gets you nowhere, especially in a minority parliament. So, again, I'm hopeful that they will listen to former Crown prosecutors. They will listen to thoughtful people in the legal community, police officers, victims groups. Like there are things that can be done that will make the system better. There's nothing that can happen easily, simply overnight that will make us all immediately feel safe. But I do think that good people of good faith offering good solutions can get a lot of things done that they'll be proud of. And I think Canadians expect that. They don't want that. They expect that.
I got 30 seconds. It's all yours, Nathan.
It was your interview with Andrew Scheer before this that really, the tact that Mr. Poilievre was taking on the RCMP, talking about locking up Justin Trudeau. It's just so, I know he tried to get away from this in the last election of being, Trump light. But all of these attacks, I worry it distracts away from some of these serious issues that we're talking about. And calling the RCMP despicable, I don't understand the politic of it. It sounds imported from south of the border, and we want U.S. imports that are good. This isn't one of them, and I'm confused and a little worried about where he's taking his tack in right now.
Well, I got to leave it on that note. Thank you very much, all of you, for the discussion tonight. I appreciate it. Our front bench, Brian Gallant, James Moore, and Nathan Cullen. We're back in a moment. Your top headlines are up next right here on CTV News Channel. Thanks for watching Power Play tonight. I'm Vashi Kapelos. Have a great night.